Adam Kinzinger of Illinois for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to everybody for being here. This is important. We're going to face this again someday. If history's any guide, and it always is. Yeah, I'm going to say something that for some reason, those of us in politics can't understand, but the average American does, which is Joe Biden bungled the execution of this pullout, and Donald Trump set this up to fail. You cannot negotiate with an in-state of leaving and tweet about it daily and expect to get any kind of a good deal. I want to be clear about that. And, the other thing we hear a lot about, the surrender of the Afghan military, and I agree, I wish they'd have fought harder. I think it's important to keep in mind, though, every military relies on air power and logistics, and that's what we built in the Afghan military. I don't think there's a lot of forces in this world that would be able to withstand an assault from the Taliban without logistics and without air support and with allies abandoning them. I think you would see military units break down. I think it's clear that we surrendered unnecessarily in this fight. As President Reagan said, we can have peace, we can have it tomorrow, surrender. The problem is, in a few days, you may not have that peace anymore. General McMaster, I read your book, and it's really good, by the way, I recommend it. But I want to ask you a couple of things. So first off, you discuss the area of corruption. And I want to ask you about that corruption in, yes, the Taliban, but particularly the former Afghan government, because that's where a lot of our endless war, friends would come down and say it's too corrupt, not worth it. Can you talk a little bit about maybe the role of corruption, how we could have done it better?
Hey, I thank you for this opportunity. I commanded a counter-corruption and organized crime task force in Afghanistan for 2 years. Once we realized it was a fatal threat to the state, it was maybe too little, too late, and of course, many of the recommendations didn't make it past Washington D.C. because we continued to try to turn a blind eye to it. But I'll tell you, I think what is very poorly understood is where that corruption came from. It came from our short-term approach to what was necessarily a long-term effort in Afghanistan. And we kept telling the Afghans, hey, we're leaving. Hey, we're leaving. Okay, now we're really leaving. And so Afghans, they looked over their shoulder. Who's got our back? Nobody. So what's going to happen? Probably a return to the Civil War from 92 to 96. So what do we do about that? We need to build up our war chest and our power base in advance of a post-United States, post-international community Afghanistan. And this incentivized the Mujahideen-era militias, who we empowered, remember, as the main defeat mechanism for the Taliban in 2001 with our tremendous intelligence professionals, the special forces, and air power, to then morph into criminalized patronage networks who captured the nascent state institutions and functions that were being rebuilt in the wake of the Taliban destruction of those institutions. And what those organizations did is they stole from the state and weaken the state to build up those power bases. Hamid Karzai, having looked over his shoulder, who's got my back? Nobody. He began to cut deals with them. And so what he did is he gave these groups license to steal in exchange for their political fealty. So this is why these networks were actually hollowing out and weakening the state institutions we were trying to build. And we didn't take enough time, we did on TIC time, or task force did, to understand the political drivers of this and then to address it. And the fundamental way to address it was with really a long-term commitment and backing the reforms that were necessary. Now these, again, Afghanistan didn't need to be Denmark. Afghanistan just needed to be Afghanistan with a political settlement and a political structure in place that was anti-jihadist terrorists. And that's what we had. And the reason why Afghan forces collapsed, I go into more detail on this in my statement for the record, is we delivered psychological blow after psychological blow to them, from the capitulation agreement of 2020, which you mentioned, to not allowing the Afghans to be part of that negotiation, to then forcing the Afghan government to release 5,000 of the most heinous people on earth, who went immediately back to terrorizing the Afghan people, and then announcing our withdrawal, announcing the date of the withdrawal, giving them the troop limits to the Taliban. That's capitulation is what that is. And then what did the Taliban do with that? They went around to the Afghan units and they said, hey, here's how this is going to go. With the backing of the Pakistani ISI, intertwined with the Haqqani network and Al-Qaeda, what they did is they told those commanders, hey, listen, you accommodate with us when we give you the signal, or we kill your family. How does that sound? And so that's why the Afghan forces collapsed, in addition to what you mentioned, which is the withdrawal of our intelligence support, the withdrawal of our air power, which was the Afghan forces' differential advantage. The Taliban's differential advantage was the backing by the ISI and other groups, but it was their unscrupulousness and they're willing to terrorize. They didn't give up their differential advantage, and so I don't think it's a mystery at all why they collapsed. And I think it should be unacceptable, I think, to disparage the Afghans who did fight, and over 60,000 of them made the ultimate sacrifice to preserve the freedoms we're now seeing, taken away from the Afghan people.
Thank you, sir. I have nothing to add, Mr. Chairman. I'll go back.